David and Jane had been married for 6 years. The adage, opposites attract, found its embodiment in this couple. Jane's temperament was marked by explosiveness, while David was calm, even amorphous, and passive. However, despite this, his wife was jealous of everything in the world. David found it perplexing. In his view, he provided no grounds for doubting his fidelity. He consistently returned home punctually, and if there were delays, he would typically give a heads up. Avoiding any secrecy, he preferred straightforward communication and expected the same openness from others. Jane avoided directly discussing the reasons behind her intense jealousy. Perhaps her possessive nature played a role in this. Despite her husband expressing a desire to have a child, she consistently deferred or actively avoided engaging in conversations about it. On one hand, Jane's husband acknowledged her free-spirited nature and reluctance to be confined at home with a baby throughout maternity leave. On the other hand, considering the many years they had spent together, it was high time to contemplate expanding their family, as all the necessary conditions for doing so were in place. As the man pondered the prospect of expanding their family and the inevitable changes it would bring to their lives, Jane's thoughts were elsewhere. She kept it a secret from her spouse, though. The woman started to spend an increasing amount of time at work. Occasionally, she wouldn't even inform her husband in advance about her late arrival home. She would simply show up and casually mention where she'd been. David for the first time refrained from inquiring about the sudden surge in his wife's workload and simply embraced it. He trusted her. As a result, he found it hard to believe that her frequent tardiness might not even be related to her job. After sharing a meal together one evening, Jane, as if a thought had just occurred to her, mentioned her upcoming visit to her parents for a few days. Explaining that they needed assistance and hadn't seen each other in a while, she expressed her intention to go. "So let me go with you. It's been a long time since we went anywhere," David proposed, embracing his wife. She looked at him a little distantly. "No need. I want to go alone," she replied, attempting to maintain her composure. Her husband was disappointed by her reaction. Despite his efforts to insist on accompanying her, suggesting he could take the weekend off, his wife had already resolved to go alone. Jane would calm down and come to her senses after being alone, so he had to let her go. Maybe all she truly wanted was a few days alone herself. After his wife departed the following day, David headed to the grocery store after work. As he stopped in front of the meat cooler and began to select the freshest piece, something caught his eye to his right. Turning his gaze in that direction, he glimpsed a face he recognized. It was Evelyn, a close friend of his wife's. Although her cart was filled with groceries, a somber expression adorned her face. He called out to her, and upon recognizing him, she approached with a hint of embarrassment. A small conversation ensued. Evelyn thought Jane was at the store at first, but when she heard that she had gone to her parents' house, she was surprised. "Come on," Evelyn asked, puzzled. It seemed odd, especially since Jane hadn't told me that. She lowered her head and thought. Suddenly, a fleeting realization flashed across her face, and she looked at David without blinking. "Are you busy at the moment?" she inquired abruptly. "Would you like to find a place to sit? There's a bar nearby." The man cast another glance at the cart, now nearly overflowing with groceries. "Where's Blake? Isn't he with you?" he inquired. "No, Blake isn't with me," she responded, a hint of sadness crossing her face for a moment. "Could you lend a hand with the bags, perhaps?" she asked more cheerfully. "Absolutely," David chuckled. The man drove Evelyn to her residence and then carried all the heavy bags to the apartment. In appreciation for his assistance, she extended an invitation for tea. Though David hesitated internally, he agreed for the sake of courtesy, not wanting to offend his hostess. Evelyn swiftly assembled refreshments for their tea, and they engaged in conversation. At a certain point, the man noticed a subtle change in his wife's friend as she inched closer and adopted a somewhat flirtatious demeanor. However, her eyes betrayed a sense of longing. David chose to ignore her advances initially, as he had no intention of cheating on his wife. Despite Evelyn's undeniable attractiveness, when her trembling hand touched his knee in excitement, he couldn't bear it and sternly intervened, saying, "Evelyn, I'm married, and you have a husband. Let's not do anything foolish." His serious tone jolted her back to reality, and she immediately covered her face with her hands, breaking into sobs. David found himself taken aback by her unexpected reaction, leaving him feeling confused and uncertain about how to proceed. In an attempt to console her, he awkwardly placed his hand on her shoulder, only to have the woman sharply recoil from his touch. How could she continue her flirtations now? He thought, as the situation had become even more complicated. "I'm sorry," Evelyn began. "I just wanted to get back at Jane." She closed her arms again and continued to cry. The man was completely bewildered by the turn of events. "What are you avenging?" he questioned. "You really don't know? Your wife is having an affair with my husband, and now they've gone somewhere together, deceiving both you and me." David regarded Evelyn with disbelief, as if she had said something absurd. "What are you talking about?" he exclaimed with indignation, abruptly rising from the table and pushing it aside. "Why didn't she even think to bring you with her?" "When she remembered her parents and went to see them," the woman added. The man reacted as though struck by an electric shock. Evelyn's words stung, reigniting the suspicions David had cautiously kept at bay. Anger surged within him, an emotion he seldom experienced. However, before taking any action, he needed to confirm whether these accusations were more than baseless speculations. "Are you sure?" he inquired. "You still don't believe it? Okay, why don't you call her now? And I'll call him later. He never silences his phone, so we'll hear if they're around." With a sense of dread, David took the phone in his hand and dialed the number. The pressure in his ears was palpable, and the seconds of waiting seemed interminable. Jane answered the call as if nothing had occurred. It was quiet in the background. "Hi," uttered the husband. "Hello, something doesn't feel right," the woman said, suspicion tainting her voice. David began to ask about her well-being and the situation with her parents. He gestured for Evelyn to call her husband. Shortly afterward, David heard a dial tone, but it was quickly silenced. "He's dropped it," Evelyn whispered. "I wish you a restful vacation with Blake," the man said and disconnected. Evelyn cast a meaningful glance at David, and her whole look said, "I told you so." David questioned her sternly. "Whose apartment is this, yours?" The woman mumbled, "My mother-in-law's." "Well then, get ready. You're coming with me," he said, looking her seriously in the eye. As desired, exploiting the theme of jealousy, Jane's maneuvers were effortlessly anticipated by her spouse. She called him in a panic to find out the cause of the misunderstanding. Upon her return the following day, David positioned himself at the entrance, obstructing her passage. "Plummy and David, what on earth is going through your mind?" "I explicitly informed you of my whereabouts," the wife exclaimed, her irritation palpable. In that instance, a woman clad in a brief silk robe discreetly emerged from behind Jane's husband, beckoning her to the table with a tender tone. Jane's countenance instantly tensed. Although she recognized her friend, encountering her here and in such a condition was utterly unexpected. An expletive escaped Jane's lips. David merely smirked, instructing her to steer clear of his apartment before shutting the door in the face of his unfaithful and enraged wife. Days later, he gathered all of Jane's possessions and dispatched them directly to her lover's residence. They grew rather close to Evelyn and discovered they were remarkably compatible, so they kept living together while completing their divorce from past relationships. Jane moved in with Blake, but her anger at her friend and husband persisted for a while. She was severely affected by their retaliation. Amidst this backdrop, Jane started experiencing bouts of jealousy directed towards Blake. She would complain incessantly, every time he was even slightly delayed at work. And that was the reason he kept coming home later and later. The once vibrant passion between them dwindled significantly, but now she found herself with ample time to seek out a new target. Now on to the next story. Jessica and Thomas tied the knot in their early 20s, not propelled by profound love, but by necessity. Jessica learned she was pregnant. It was difficult the first time. Thomas was forced to leave school to start working. Weakness and toxemia plagued the girl, enduring sleepless nights caring for their newborn daughter. To put it briefly, the young couple jumped straight into adulthood. They had, of course, family support. In order to at least save money on rent, Thomas's grandmother provided him with an apartment where the couple settled. As the years passed and their love deepened, the couple became close to one another. Just recently, they saw off their favorite daughter to university in another city. Over the ensuing years, the husband observed as the routines of daily life gradually took a toll on his wife. She began to succumb more frequently to feelings of depression, and then when her daughter left, Jessica completely collapsed. It was agonizing for the man to witness his beloved enduring suffering, prompting him to exert all his efforts in lifting her spirits. One day, he made the decision to change their surroundings and provide his wife with a welcome distraction. Proposing a vacation out of town came as an unexpected yet delightful suggestion. Jessica agreed. During the vacation, she succeeded in unwinding. The strained look on her face transformed into a delightful smile as she and her husband sat in a restaurant for lunch. At a certain moment, Thomas noticed that his wife was completely inattentive to him. Instead, she was keenly focused on something, wearing a slight smile. He turned around, suddenly realizing what, or rather who, had captured his wife's interest. She was giving a young employee in the area a glare. The man, who appeared to be in his early 20s, grinned brightly at the guest who was observing him. Despite feeling hurt by the situation, he refrained from reprimanding her. Several months had passed since the recent events. Things carried on as normal. Thomas's phone rang one day while he was working. John, an old acquaintance, was on the line. They hadn't seen each other for a long time, and suddenly he called and set up a meeting after work. In the evening, John began to cautiously question Thomas about his family life, but the inquiry soon took a strange turn. Thomas noticed the confusion on his friend's face and remarked, "You seem a bit off. Is everything okay?" The friend responded, "I just saw something." Then he went on to explain what had upset him. He said that while waiting for a colleague at a restaurant during his lunch break, he had unexpectedly encountered Jessica there. She was seated next to a young man who appeared to be in his early 20s. The woman persisted in glancing around as though she was terrified to run into someone she recognized. She missed John since he was seated rather far away. The man scowled, starting to imagine the worst-case situation. What were they doing? He said nothing at all. They placed their orders for food and drinks. Her laughter at his jokes and the keen interest in her gaze left me perplexed, remarked the friend. "Thank you for informing me. I'll handle it," Thomas replied with a serious tone. He then tried to change the subject so as not to mar the meeting with this conversation, and spend time with his friend. That same evening, Thomas began asking his wife about her encounter with the young man. "Are you referring to Brian? That's the son of my friend Carol. And we were waiting for her there together," she said with a light-hearted chuckle. Thomas was taken aback by the unexpected turn of events. Carol was a close friend of his wife, making the entire story appear entirely plausible. He refrained from escalating the conflict. In the weeks that followed, his wife just glowed. She started wearing an enigmatic smile more frequently and seldom left her phone unattended. Despite his efforts to avoid concocting conspiracy theories in his mind, the discussion about a young man purportedly the friend's son lingered incessantly in his thoughts. One day, while walking home and seeking solace to clear his mind as he hadn't been feeling like himself lately, a nagging sense that something was off lingered. Abruptly, a voice called out to him, jolting him from his contemplation. Turning towards the sound, he found the smiling woman, who he couldn't quite place. Eventually, he identified her as Carol, the very friend of his wife, whose son, Jessica, had been spotted with. He wasn't familiar with the friend, having encountered her only a handful of times. It dawned on him that he lacked any substantial knowledge about her family. After some casual banter, he inquired, "Is your son working or studying?" "Brian? He's so lazy he doesn't need a job. He just wants to finish the quarter with no C's," Carol chuckled. At this point, Thomas started to speculate about what was happening, because the man his friend had seen didn't appear to be a schoolboy, and was unquestionably in his 20s. He then questioned, "Do you recall the last time you and Jessica crossed paths?" The woman responded, "With Jessica, I believe it's been since last year. Why do you ask?" Thomas attempted to swiftly conclude the conversation, his mind preoccupied with other matters. He realized that his wife had been deceiving him all along. Fate intervened, shedding light on the situation. The burden became unbearable. The truth now laid bare before him. His wife had deceived him, concealing an affair with a younger man. Memories of her admiring someone during a vacation flooded his mind. Evidently, the effects of the midlife crisis had caught up with Thomas. He rushed home urgently, realizing that he was already delayed because he had decided to take a walk at the end of the day. Jessica should have arrived home by now. Standing in the entryway, Thomas awaited the elevator. When the elevator doors opened, he caught a glimpse of someone hastily ascending the stairs to the floor above from his peripheral vision. On the threshold of the apartment, he spotted his wife. As soon as their eyes locked, he could tell she was worried. "What's going on?" the husband growled ominously, lingering just outside the apartment. His words reverberated through the entryway. "Honey, please don't raise your voice." "The neighbors are around," Jessica urged in a hushed tone, distancing herself from the door, as if to welcome her husband inside. "You didn't come out to meet me," Thomas said. Out of nowhere, a man's voice echoed from above. Thomas turned his gaze toward the unexpected speaker. A young man stood there, locking eyes with the husband with a determined and defiant expression. "I told you to leave," Jessica exclaimed. "Is this your lover?" The husband sneered arrogantly. "She is. You can just go. We didn't invite you. Leave Jessica alone. She's tired of you," the young man declared insolently. Unable to tolerate such impudence, Thomas swiftly ascended to the brash man and gave him a strong punch to the face because he would not put up with such disrespect. Jessica hurriedly approached to intervene and prevent further fighting. "Before you say anything, you'd better find out whose apartment this is," Thomas shouted. Then he turned to the cheating wife and said, "Take this one, and when you've played with him, you don't have to come back to me." With these words, the man entered his apartment and shut the door behind him. After some time, Jessica started knocking on the door, insisting, "Let me in. We need to talk." The husband didn't feel like engaging in conversation after all the drama. He gathered his unfaithful wife's belongings and shoved them out the door. The only relief for the man was that their daughter was in another city and didn't witness this situation. He broke the news of the divorce to her when she visited her parents for the weekend, having already received the documents. What her father shared came as a genuine shock to the girl, leaving her unable to summon the strength to call her mother. And Jessica, judging by the conversations of acquaintances, moved in with that young man. Now she was responsible for the apartment rent, as the guy had previously been living with friends, pretending it was his own place. He was a typical poor student with a not-so-lucrative part-time job. However, in the heat of passion, the grown woman didn't concern herself with such matters. The rose-colored spectacles started to come off over time. Jessica realized that her lover felt comfortable with her, for she was the source of their existence. For obvious reasons, the man did not introduce her to his friends and family. The woman eventually had enough of this kind of life and parted ways with her young lover. She was unable to return to her family, so she started living alone and making plans for her future. The fact that her beloved daughter did not contact her most of all saddened her. Their future relationships were in jeopardy since it was no longer possible to envision seeing her grandchildren or even becoming acquainted with her son-in-law for obvious reasons. Thank you for listening to the story until the end. And if you enjoyed it, please support us with a like and subscribe to our channel. Share your thoughts about the story in the comments.